What if I told you that right now, sitting in government vaults around the world, are documents so explosive they could rewrite everything you think you know about history? What if the most unbelievable conspiracy theories pale in comparison to the actual documented truth that governments have been hiding from us for decades? Tonight we are going to take you on a journey through the darkest corners of classified government operations. Mind control experiments that would make science fiction seem tame. UFO encounters that even skeptics cannot explain. Assassination. Plots involving everyone from world leaders to innocent civilians. And secret wars fought in the shadows while the public remained completely unaware. These are not theories. These are facts documented in thousands of pages of declassified government. Files that were never meant to see the light of day. Some of these documents were ordered destroyed, but survived by accident. Others were hidden so deep in government archives that they were forgotten for decades until researchers finally uncovered them. We have spent months combing through these classified documents to bring you the most shocking revelations ever released. Many of these stories sound too insane to be true, but every single detail is backed up by official government records. Before we begin this journey into the hidden history of our world, take a moment to subscribe and hit that notification bell, because what you are about to learn will change how you see everything around you. The rabbit hole goes deeper than you could ever imagine. And once you start learning these secrets, there's no going back to ignorance. Let us begin with perhaps the most disturbing program ever conducted by any government. A project so dark that most of its records were ordered destroyed. In the depths of the Cold War, when fear gripped both sides of the Iron Curtain, the CIA embarked on a program so controversial that most of its records were ordered destroyed. This was MK Ultra, a project that sounds too dark to be real. Starting in 1953, the Central Intelligence Agency began experimenting with mind control techniques. The goal was simple in concept, terrifying in execution: to find ways to control human behavior, extract information, and create the perfect interrogation methods. Dr. Sidney Gottlieb, a chemist who became known as the CIA's Black Sorcerer, led these experiments. Under his direction, thousands of unsuspecting Americans became test subjects in a program that would violate every principle of medical ethics. The experiments were conducted in hospitals, prisons, and even brothels. Patients seeking treatment for depression would instead receive massive doses of LSD without their knowledge. Prisoners were offered reduced sentences in exchange for participating in drug trials they did not fully understand. One of the most shocking locations was the Allen Memorial Institute in Montreal, Canada. Here Dr. Donald Ewan Cameron conducted experiments funded by the CIA through front organizations. Patients were put into drug-induced comas for weeks or months, while speakers played repeated messages designed to pattern their personalities. The goal was to erase a person's existing personality completely, creating what they called a blank slate that could then be reprogrammed. Some patients lost their memories entirely, forgetting their families, their past, even basic skills like how to use a bathroom. The human cost of these experiments was devastating. One tennis player, Harald Blauer, checked into a psychiatric hospital for depression following his divorce. He became an unwitting test subject and died after being injected with experimental drugs. His death was covered up for over 20 years. The CIA also operated something called Operation Midnight Climax. They set up safe houses that functioned as brothels where prostitutes would drug clients with LSD while CIA agents watched through two-way mirrors. The subjects had no idea they were being observed during their most vulnerable moments. George Hunter White, a former narcotics agent who ran these operations, once wrote, "I toiled wholeheartedly in the vineyards because it was fun, fun, fun. Where else could a red-blooded American boy lie, kill, cheat, steal, and pillage with? The sanction and blessing of the All-Highest." The scope of these experiments stretched far beyond American borders. The CIA recruited Nazi scientists who had conducted medical experiments in concentration camps. These war criminals were brought to America and given new identities in exchange for sharing their horrific research. The knowledge gained from human suffering in Nazi death camps was incorporated into American intelligence operations. When concerns about the program finally reached CIA leadership in 1973, Director Richard Helms ordered the destruction of all MK Ultra files. Thousands of documents were burned or shredded. Only a small cache of financial records stored separately survived to tell this dark story. The Church Committee investigating intelligence abuses in 1975 uncovered what remained of the program. Their findings shocked the American public and led to new oversight of intelligence agencies. But the full extent of MK Ultra may never be known, buried forever in the ashes of destroyed documents. Survivors and families of victims have spent decades seeking justice. Some have received compensation, but the psychological scars remain. The program's legacy serves as a reminder of what can happen when government agencies operate without oversight or accountability. But mind control was not the only impossible-sounding program that turned out to be real. Governments around the world were also secretly investigating phenomena that officially did not exist. For decades, UFO sightings were dismissed as fantasies or misidentifications. But recently declassified documents reveal that governments have been taking these encounters very seriously indeed. The modern UFO era began in 1947 with pilot Kenneth Arnold's sighting of strange objects over Mount Rainier in Washington. His description of craft that flew like saucers skipping on water gave birth to the term flying saucer. What followed was a wave of sightings that prompted military investigation. Project Blue Book, the Air Force's official UFO investigation program, ran from 1952 to 1969. During this time, they investigated over 12,000 reported sightings. While most were explained as conventional aircraft, weather phenomena, or astronomical objects, about 700 cases remained classified as unidentified. But the most intriguing cases were often kept secret. The 1952 Washington, D.C. UFO incident brought the phenomenon into the national spotlight. For several nights in July, unidentified objects appeared on radar screens at Washington National Airport and Andrews Air Force Base. Fighter jets were scrambled, but the objects would disappear whenever aircraft approached. The radar operators were experienced professionals who had tracked thousands of conventional aircraft. They insisted these objects moved in ways that defied known physics, making impossible turns, accelerating instantly, and moving at speeds that would have destroyed any earthly craft. Similar encounters were happening around the world. In the Soviet Union, declassified KGB files reveal that they too were investigating UFO sightings. One particularly detailed case occurred in 1986 near the village of Dalnegorsk in the Far East. Witnesses observed a reddish sphere crashing into a hill. When investigators arrived, they found unusual metallic fragments that contained elements arranged in ways that could not be replicated with known technology. The crash site showed evidence of extreme heat, with rocks that had been partially melted. Most mysterious were tiny mesh-like structures found at the scene, made of impossibly thin fibers interwoven with gold threads. The technology to create such intricate nanostructures would not exist for decades. Military encounters were equally puzzling. At Malmstrom Air Force Base in Montana, nuclear missile operators reported UFOs hovering over their silos in 1967. During these encounters, the nuclear weapons mysteriously went offline, their guidance systems failing simultaneously. Similar incidents occurred at other nuclear facilities, both American and Soviet. Former missile launch officer Robert Salas has testified that he witnessed a UFO disabling nuclear weapons. He described a glowing red object that hovered silently over the missile field, while one by one the nuclear missiles showed no-go status on their control panels. The implications were staggering. If these accounts are accurate, unknown craft demonstrated the ability to interfere with the most sophisticated weapons systems on Earth. The incident suggested an intelligence that could neutralize humanity's most destructive weapons at will. The military's official position remained skeptical. Despite thousands of reports from trained observers, pilots, radar operators, military personnel, the official stance was that UFOs pose no threat to national security. But internal documents told a different story. A 1952 CIA assessment warned that UFO reports could be exploited by hostile nations to clog intelligence channels or mask real attacks. The agency recommended a program to debunk UFO sightings and reduce public interest in the phenomenon. This led to what researchers call a culture of ridicule around UFO reports. Military personnel were discouraged from reporting sightings, and those who did often faced career consequences. The subject became taboo in scientific circles, despite the high quality of some witness testimony. Recent developments have changed everything. In 2017, the Pentagon acknowledged a classified UFO investigation program called the ATIP, Advanced Aerospace Threat Identification Program. They released 3 videos showing military encounters with objects that displayed extraordinary flight characteristics. The Tic Tac video, recorded by Navy pilots in 2004, shows an oblong object that accelerates beyond the pilot's ability to track. The object showed no visible propulsion system and moved in ways that would have generated G-forces fatal to any human occupant. Luis Elizondo, who ran the Pentagon's UFO program, stated, "These aircraft, we will call them aircraft, are displaying characteristics that are not currently within the U.S. inventory, nor in any foreign inventory that we are aware of." The stigma is finally lifting. In 2021, the Pentagon released an official report acknowledging that military personnel have encountered phenomena they cannot explain. The report stopped short of suggesting extraterrestrial origins, but admitted that some objects display unusual flight characteristics. Congress has since mandated regular briefings on what are now called unidentified aerial phenomena, or UAPs. Intelligence officials have testified that they cannot explain the technology behind some encounters. For the first time in decades, serious scientists and engineers are openly studying these cases. The possibility that Earth is being visited by non-human intelligence is no longer considered fringe thinking. The implications extend far beyond simple curiosity. If these craft represent technology from other worlds, the scientific and technological insights could transform human civilization. Alternatively, if they represent advanced technology from foreign nations, they could pose serious national security implications. Either way, the declassified documents make one thing clear: we are not alone in taking this phenomenon seriously. Governments around the world have been quietly investigating UFOs for decades, accumulating evidence that challenges our understanding of what is possible. But UFOs were not the only impossible phenomena that governments were secretly studying. During the Cold War, both superpowers engaged in a shadow war that makes James Bond movies seem tame by comparison. During the Cold War, the world became a chessboard where intelligence agencies played deadly games of espionage. The stakes were nothing less than global dominance, and the players were willing to go to extraordinary lengths to gain advantage. The Central Intelligence Agency and the Soviet KGB engaged in a shadow war that spanned decades. While nuclear weapons kept the superpowers from direct military conflict, their intelligence services fought battles that were very real, very personal, and often very deadly. The rivalry began almost immediately after World War II ended. The United States, with its newly formed CIA, faced off against the Soviet Union's more experienced intelligence apparatus. The Soviets had been running spy networks since the 1917 revolution, giving them a significant head start. Early Soviet successes were devastating. Klaus Fuchs, a German-born physicist working on the Manhattan Project, passed atomic secrets to the Soviets. His intelligence allowed the Soviet Union to develop nuclear weapons years ahead of American estimates. When the Soviets detonated their first atomic bomb in 1949, it was modeled directly on the American Fat Man design, the Cambridge 5. British intelligence officers recruited while students at Cambridge University penetrated the highest levels of British and American intelligence. Kim Philby, Donald MacLean, Guy Burgess, Anthony Blunt, and John Cairncross passed secrets to Moscow for decades. Philby was particularly damaging. As a senior MI6 officer and CIA liaison, he had access to virtually every Western intelligence operation. When he finally defected to Moscow in 1963, the intelligence services had to assume that all their operations had been compromised. The Americans struck back with technology. The CIA developed a U-2 spy plane capable of flying at altitudes beyond the reach of Soviet interceptors. From 1956 to 1960, these aircraft provided unprecedented intelligence on Soviet military capabilities, photographing missile sites, military installations, and industrial facilities. The program was so secret that even President Eisenhower initially denied its existence. When Gary Power's U-2 was shot down over the Soviet Union in 1960, it created a major diplomatic crisis. Khrushchev revealed not only the wreckage but also Powers himself, alive and captured. The Berlin Tunnel represented the height of technical espionage. In one of the most ambitious operations of the Cold War, the CIA and MI6 dug a tunnel from West Berlin into East Berlin to tap Soviet communication cables. Operation Gold, as it was called, took years to plan and execute. The tunnel was an engineering marvel, 1,476 feet long and lined with steel to prevent detection. For nearly a year, it intercepted thousands of communications, providing invaluable intelligence on Soviet military plans and capabilities. But there was a devastating twist. George Blake, an MI6 officer who was secretly working for the KGB, had informed the Soviets about the tunnel before construction even began. The Soviets allowed the operation to continue, feeding false information while protecting their most sensitive communications. Human intelligence remained crucial. Despite technological advances, the most valuable intelligence still came from human sources. Both sides recruited agents within each other's governments, often using blackmail, ideology, or simple greed as motivation. Aldrich Ames, a CIA counterintelligence officer, sold secrets to the KGB for nearly a decade. His betrayal led to the execution of at least 10 CIA assets in the Soviet Union. When he was finally caught in 1994, investigators found he had been paid over $2.7 million for his treachery. Robert Hansen, an FBI agent, spied for the Soviets, and later the Russians for over 20 years. He provided information about American double agents, nuclear war plans, and intelligence capabilities. His case was particularly damaging because he had access to some of America's most closely guarded secrets. The proxy wars extended the conflict globally. Unable to fight directly, the superpowers battled through proxies in Asia, Africa, and Latin America. The CIA and KGB trained fighters, provided weapons, and conducted covert operations on every continent. In Afghanistan, the CIA armed and trained Mujahideen fighters against the Soviet occupation. The operation, codenamed Cyclone, became the agency's largest covert action program. Billions of dollars in weapons flowed through Pakistan to the Afghan resistance. The KGB responded by supporting leftist movements worldwide. In Central America, they provided aid to revolutionary groups fighting American-backed governments. The conflict became known as the Dirty Wars, characterized by brutal tactics on both sides. Disinformation became a powerful weapon. Both agencies became masters of what the Soviets called disinformatsia, the deliberate spreading of false information. The goal was to confuse adversaries, influence public opinion, and discredit opponents. The KGB's Service A specialized in spreading conspiracy theories and false stories. They promoted the idea that the CIA had created AIDS as a biological weapon, that the moon landing was faked, and that the Kennedy assassination was an American government conspiracy. The CIA responded with its own disinformation campaigns. They spread stories about Soviet biological weapons programs, exaggerated the threat of communist expansion, and planted false intelligence designed to waste Soviet resources. The human cost was enormous. Beyond the famous cases were thousands of unknown agents who paid the ultimate price. Families were destroyed, lives were lost, and entire countries became battlegrounds in the Shadow War. East German border guards shot citizens trying to escape to the West. Soviet dissidents disappeared into gulags. Latin American civilians died in conflicts fueled by superpower rivalry. The intelligence war had very real consequences for ordinary people. The end came suddenly. With the fall of the Berlin Wall in 1989 and the collapse of the Soviet Union in 1991, the Cold War spy game finally ended. Both sides had spent vast fortunes on intelligence operations that ultimately failed to prevent the peaceful end of the conflict. Many former enemies found themselves working together against new threats: terrorism, nuclear proliferation, and organized crime. The skills developed during decades of rivalry were redirected toward common challenges. The legacy lives on. The Cold War spy wars established templates for modern intelligence work. The techniques developed, satellite surveillance, electronic intercepts, covert action, remain fundamental to intelligence agencies today. But the era also demonstrated the dangers of unchecked intelligence power. Programs like MKUltra and the surveillance of domestic political groups showed how intelligence agencies could abuse their authority when operating without sufficient oversight. While the CIA and KGB were fighting their shadow war, another type of secret program was being developed that would make their assassination plots seem almost quaint by comparison. In laboratories hidden from public view, scientists working for their governments have developed some of the most terrifying weapons ever conceived. These biological agents could kill millions, yet their existence was kept secret for decades. The development of biological weapons began during World War I, but reached its dark zenith during the Cold War. Both superpowers, along with other nations, sought to weaponize disease itself, turning viruses, bacteria, and toxins into instruments of warfare. The Japanese program was the most horrific. Unit 731, operating in occupied Manchuria during World War II, conducted medical experiments on living human subjects. Led by Dr. Shiro Ishii, the unit infected prisoners with plague, anthrax, cholera, and other diseases to study their effects. Prisoners were vivisected while still alive to observe disease progression. Some were exposed to extreme cold to study frostbite. Others were subjected to high-pressure chambers or radiation. An estimated 10,000 people died in these experiments. After Japan's surrender, the United States granted immunity to Unit 731 researchers in exchange for their data. This information became the foundation for America's own biological weapons program. Despite being obtained through crimes against humanity, the Soviet program was massive in scope. The Soviet Union developed the world's largest biological weapons program, employing tens of thousands of scientists and technicians. The program, known as Biopreparate, officially researched defensive measures against biological attack while secretly developing offensive weapons. They worked with anthrax, plague, smallpox, and Marburg virus. Soviet scientists even attempted to weaponize genetic engineering, trying to create antibiotic-resistant strains of bacteria and hybrid viruses that could evade vaccines. The city of Stepnogorsk in Kazakhstan housed a facility capable of producing tons of anthrax weapons annually. The Uralsk 7 facility on Vozrozdeny Island tested weapons on laboratory animals and sometimes political prisoners. American efforts were equally secretive. The United States Army operated its biological weapons program at Fort Detrick in Maryland. From 1943 to 1969, they developed agents including anthrax, botulinum toxin, and exotic pathogens designed to destroy crops and livestock. Project SHAD, Shipboard Hazard and Defense, conducted secret tests on military personnel. Sailors were exposed to biological and chemical agents without their knowledge or consent. Many suffered long-term health effects and some died from exposure. The Army also conducted open-air tests over populated areas. In 1950, they released bacteria over San Francisco Bay to study how biological agents might spread in a real attack. The bacteria caused infections in local hospitals, though the Army denied any connection. Accidental releases demonstrated the dangers. In 1979, an explosion at a Soviet biological weapons facility in Sverdlovsk, now Yekaterinburg, released anthrax spores into the atmosphere. At least 66 people died from inhalation anthrax, a form of the disease that is nearly always fatal. The Soviet government claimed the outbreak was caused by contaminated meat, but evidence later confirmed it was an accidental weapons release. The incident showed how easily these programs could threaten the very populations they claimed to protect. Delivery systems were ingeniously deadly. Scientists developed numerous ways to disperse biological agents. Spray tanks could be mounted on aircraft or ships. Artillery shells and missiles were designed to carry disease payloads. Even insects were considered as potential carriers. The Soviet Union developed a system of battle strains, diseases modified for maximum lethality and resistance to treatment. These included antibiotic-resistant plague and anthrax spores that could survive in the environment for decades. Some programs explored genetic weapons, biological agents that would target specific ethnic groups based on genetic markers. While technically challenging, the concept represents perhaps the most sinister application of biological warfare. The psychological warfare aspect. Beyond their physical effects, biological weapons served as tools of terror. The mere threat of disease could paralyze enemy populations with fear. Unlike conventional weapons, biological agents were invisible, potentially spreading from person to person in an unstoppable pandemic. Intelligence agencies exploited these fears. The KGB spread rumors about American biological weapons programs to discredit U.S. policy. The CIA responded with its own propaganda about Soviet capabilities. International efforts to control these weapons. The Biological Weapons Convention, signed in 1972, prohibited the development, production, and stockpiling of biological agents for offensive purposes. However, the treaty's verification mechanisms were weak, and several nations continued secret programs. Iraq's biological weapons program, led by British-trained microbiologist Rehab Taha, developed anthrax, botulinum toxin, and aflatoxin weapons. The program was hidden from UN inspectors for years before being exposed after the Gulf War. The Soviet defector who revealed the truth, Ken Alibek, a former deputy director of Biopreparat, defected to the United States in 1992. His revelations exposed the massive scale of Soviet biological weapons development and confirmed Western fears about the program's capabilities. Alibek described facilities that could produce tons of weaponized anthrax, plague, and smallpox. He revealed that the Soviets had developed techniques to combine multiple diseases in single weapons, creating cocktails that would overwhelm medical defenses. His testimony helped convince policymakers of the need for stronger biodefense programs and better international monitoring of biological research. Modern bioterrorism threats. The 2001 anthrax letter attacks in the United States demonstrated how easily biological agents could be used by terrorists. 5 people died and 17 were infected when letters containing anthrax spores were mailed to media offices and government officials. The investigation revealed that the anthrax came from a U.S. Army biodefense laboratory, highlighting the risks posed by legitimate research facilities. The case remained unsolved for years before, focusing on researcher Bruce Evans, who committed suicide before charges could be filed. Dual-use research concerns. Today's biotechnology revolution has created new challenges. Research that could lead to medical breakthroughs might also enable bioweapons development. Scientists have recreated extinct viruses, made existing pathogens more deadly, and developed techniques that could be misused. The COVID-19 pandemic highlighted both the natural threat posed by infectious diseases and the importance of biological research. It also raised questions about laboratory safety and the origins of pandemic pathogens. The future of biological threats. Advances in genetic engineering, synthetic biology, and artificial intelligence are creating new possibilities for biological weapons. Future threats might include designer pathogens, genetic weapons targeting specific populations, or AI-designed biological agents. International cooperation and oversight will be crucial to preventing the misuse of biological research. The lessons learned from Cold War biological weapons programs provide both warnings about what can go wrong and guidance for preventing future catastrophes. But biological weapons were not the only secret programs that governments used to influence events around the world. During the Cold War, both superpowers conducted covert operations that toppled governments, started wars, and changed the course of history. While diplomats spoke of peace and cooperation, intelligence agencies were conducting covert operations around the world. These secret interventions shaped the destinies of nations and the lives of millions. The practice of covert operations, secret activities designed to influence foreign governments without revealing the sponsor's involvement, became a hallmark of Cold War intelligence work. The CIA and KGB conducted hundreds of such operations, often with profound consequences. Iran 1953, the template for regime change. The CIA's first major covert operation was the overthrow of Iranian Prime Minister Mohammad Mossadegh in 1953. Operation Ajax was conducted in partnership with British intelligence, which was concerned about Iran's nationalization of oil resources. Mossadegh had democratically nationalized the Anglo-Iranian Oil Company, seeking to reclaim control of Iran's petroleum resources for the Iranian people. This threatened Western oil interests and was seen as a dangerous precedent for other developing nations. Kermit Roosevelt Jr., grandson of President Theodore Roosevelt, led the operation from Tehran. The CIA organized street demonstrations, bribed politicians and military officers, and spread propaganda to destabilize Mossadegh's government. The operation succeeded in restoring the Shah to power, but its long-term consequences were devastating. The Shah's repressive rule, backed by the CIA-trained secret police Savak, led to widespread resentment that culminated in the 1979 Islamic Revolution. Guatemala 1954, protecting corporate interests. In Guatemala, the CIA orchestrated the overthrow of President Jacobo Arbenz, whose land reform program threatened the United Fruit Company's extensive holdings. Operation Pabsux created a fictional liberation army, led by Colonel Carlos Castillo Armas. The CIA conducted psychological warfare, dropping leaflets and broadcasting false radio reports of invasion. They created the illusion of a massive rebel army when only a few dozen men actually crossed the border from Honduras. The operation succeeded when Arbenz resigned rather than fight what he believed was a major invasion. However, Guatemala was plunged into decades of civil war that killed over 200,000 people, mostly indigenous civilians. The Congo, assassination attempts. In the newly independent Congo, Prime Minister Patrice Lumumba's request for Soviet aid during a Belgian-backed rebellion prompted CIA intervention. The agency developed multiple plans to assassinate Lumumba, including poisoned toothpaste and a handkerchief laced with biological agents. Before the CIA could act, Lumumba was captured and killed by Congolese rivals, possibly with Belgian assistance. His death removed a charismatic African leader who might have steered the Congo toward non-alignment in the Cold War. The Congo descended into chaos, eventually coming under the dictatorship of Mobutu Sese Seko, who ruled with Western support. For over 3 decades while looting the country's vast mineral wealth, Chile, economic warfare, and political manipulation. When Salvador Allende was elected president of Chile in 1970, the CIA launched a massive covert operation to destabilize his government. Operation Track 2 included economic sabotage, support for opposition groups, and attempts to foment a military coup. The CIA spent millions funding opposition newspapers, striking truck drivers and political parties opposed to Allende. They also provided support to military officers planning his overthrow. The operation culminated in the 1973 coup that brought General Augusto Pinochet to power. Pinochet's regime killed thousands of political opponents and tortured tens of thousands more during 17 years of dictatorship. Soviet operations were equally extensive. The KGB conducted its own covert operations throughout the developing world. In Egypt, they supported Gamal Abdel Nasser's revolutionary government and helped train his intelligence services. In Cuba, Soviet intelligence played a crucial role in consolidating Fidel Castro's revolution and defending it against CIA attempts at overthrow. The KGB helped organize Cuba's intelligence services and provided training in counterintelligence techniques. The Soviets also supported liberation movements across Africa, providing weapons, training, and advisors to groups fighting colonial rule. In Angola, Mozambique, and other nations, Soviet assistance helped determine the outcome of independence struggles. Afghanistan, the Soviet Vietnam. The Soviet invasion of Afghanistan in 1979 prompted the largest CIA covert operation since World War II. Operation Cyclone provided billions of dollars in weapons and training to Afghan Mujahideen fighters resisting Soviet occupation. Working through Pakistan's intelligence service, the CIA supplied sophisticated weapons, including Stinger anti-aircraft missiles. These weapons proved crucial in neutralizing Soviet air superiority and making the occupation unsustainable. The operation succeeded in its immediate goal of forcing Soviet withdrawal, but it also contributed to the rise of Islamic extremism in the region. Some former Mujahideen fighters later joined Taliban and Al-Qaeda forces. Nicaragua, the Iran-Contra scandal. In Nicaragua, the CIA supported Contra rebels fighting the leftist Sandinista government. When Congress prohibited further aid to the Contras, the Reagan administration secretly funded them through arms sales to Iran. The Iran-Contra affair revealed how intelligence agencies could circumvent democratic oversight through creative financing schemes. Senior officials were indicted, though most were later pardoned or had their convictions overturned. The human cost of covert operations. These secret interventions had profound human consequences. Democratically elected governments were overthrown, civil wars were prolonged, and authoritarian regimes were supported in the name of Cold War strategy. Millions of people died in conflicts that were at least partially the result of superpower covert operations. Entire generations grew up under dictatorships that were installed or maintained through foreign intelligence intervention. Modern covert operations. The end of the Cold War did not end covert operations. Intelligence agencies continue to conduct secret activities to influence foreign governments and non-state actors. The targets have shifted from communist movements to terrorist organizations, weapons proliferators, and cyber threats. The methods have evolved to include sophisticated cyber operations and influence campaigns conducted through social media. Lessons learned. The Declassified History of Covert Operations provides Important lessons about the limits and dangers of secret intervention. While sometimes achieving short-term tactical success, many operations had unintended consequences that persisted for decades. The challenge for democratic societies is balancing the legitimate need for intelligence capabilities with the requirement for accountability and oversight. The secret nature of covert operations makes them difficult to control and easy to abuse. Accountability and oversight. Congressional investigations in the 1970s revealed extensive abuses by intelligence agencies and led to new oversight mechanisms. However, the tension between secrecy and accountability remains a fundamental challenge in democratic governance. The public's right to know must be balanced against legitimate security needs. Declassified documents from past operations provide valuable insights while protecting sources and methods that remain relevant to current operations. While intelligence agencies were fighting their secret wars on Earth, another competition was taking place in the cosmos above. The space race was not just about scientific achievement. It was also about military dominance. While the world watched, astronauts and cosmonauts reached for the stars. A parallel competition was taking place in the shadows. The space race was also an intelligence race, with both superpowers seeking military advantage beyond Earth's atmosphere. The conquest of space captured global imagination, but it was fundamentally driven by military considerations. Both the United States and Soviet Union understood that whoever controlled space would have decisive strategic advantages. The V2 Foundation. The space race began with Nazi Germany's V2 rocket program during World War II. Led by Wernher von Braun, German scientists developed the world's first operational ballistic missile. After Germany's defeat, both superpowers raced to capture these scientists and their technology. Operation Paperclip brought over 1,600 German scientists to the United States, including von Braun himself. These former Nazi researchers became the backbone of America's rocket program, despite their dark past involving slave labor and war crimes. The Soviets captured their own group of German rocket experts, though they relied more heavily on domestic talent led by the mysterious chief designer Sergei Korolev, whose identity was kept secret until after his death. Sputnik shock. The Soviet launch of Sputnik 1 in October 1957 sent shockwaves through the American establishment. This basketball-sized satellite proved that the Soviets had developed intercontinental ballistic missile capability, the same rocket that launched Sputnik could deliver nuclear warheads to American cities. The American response was swift but initially embarrassing. The Vanguard rocket intended to launch America's first satellite exploded on the launch pad in front of television cameras. The press called it Kaputnik and Flopnik. It fell to von Braun's team to restore American prestige. Explorer 1, launched in January 1958, not only reached orbit but made the first major scientific discovery of the space age: the Van Allen radiation belt surrounding Earth. Military space programs. Behind the civilian space agencies lay extensive military space programs. The U.S. Air Force developed the X-15 rocket plane, which reached the edge of space and provided crucial data for future spacecraft design. The Dinosaur program planned to develop a military spaceplane capable of reconnaissance, satellite interception, and even bombing missions from orbit. Though canceled in 1963, its technology influenced later programs, including the Space Shuttle. The Soviets developed their own military space initiatives. The Almaz program created space stations that were actually orbital surveillance platforms, equipped with cameras capable of reading license plates from space. Spy satellites revolutionize intelligence. The real military value of space lay in reconnaissance. The Corona satellite program, operated jointly by the CIA and Air Force, provided the first detailed images of Soviet military installations. These satellite photographs revealed that American estimates of Soviet missile strength had been vastly exaggerated. The missile gap that had driven American policy was actually in America's favor. This intelligence helped prevent military miscalculations that could have led to nuclear war. The KH-11 reconnaissance satellites, introduced in the 1970s, could transmit real-time digital images to ground stations. Their resolution was so high that they could identify individual people from orbit, revolutionizing intelligence collection. The moon race as military competition. President Kennedy's commitment to land Americans on the moon before 1970 was driven by more than scientific curiosity. The technologies required for lunar missions, powerful rockets, precision navigation, life support systems, had direct military applications. The Saturn V rocket that carried Apollo astronauts to the moon demonstrated American capability to deliver massive payloads anywhere in the solar system. This technological achievement sent a clear message about American industrial and scientific capabilities. Soviet lunar programs remained secret for decades. Only after the Cold War ended did we learn about their attempts to beat America to the moon, including plans for lunar bases and even missions to Mars. Space-based weapons systems. Both superpowers developed plans for space-based weapons. The Soviets tested an orbital bombardment system called FOB-Z, fractional orbital bombardment system, that could attack targets by approaching from the south, avoiding early warning radars. President Reagan's Strategic Defense Initiative, dubbed Star Wars by critics, proposed using space-based lasers and particle beams to shoot down incoming missiles. While never fully deployed, the program spurred significant advances in space technology. The Soviets responded with their own anti-satellite weapons, including systems that could approach enemy satellites and destroy them with explosive charges or by ramming them. Secret space stations. The Soviet Salyut program included several military space stations disguised as civilian research facilities. Salyut 2, 3, and 5 were actually Almaz military stations equipped with surveillance equipment and, according to some reports, defensive weapons. These stations were capable of detailed Earth observation and electronic intelligence gathering. Cosmonauts aboard these platforms could monitor American military activities in real time and relay intelligence to Soviet commanders. The American Manned Orbiting Laboratory and MIL program planned to put Air Force astronauts in space for similar missions. Though canceled in 1969, the program developed technologies later used in civilian and military space projects. Communication satellites as strategic assets. Military communication satellites became crucial for coordinating global operations. These systems allowed instantaneous communication between Pentagon officials and commanders anywhere in the world. The Soviets developed their own military communication networks, including systems designed to survive nuclear attack. These doomsday satellites were hardened against electromagnetic pulse and could maintain communications during a nuclear war. Space espionage programs. Both sides attempted to gather intelligence on each other's space capabilities. The Soviets developed satellites that could inspect other spacecraft in orbit, while the Americans created systems to monitor Soviet launches and space activities. The Space Shuttle program, while primarily civilian, included classified military missions. These flights deployed secret satellites and conducted experiments that remain classified to this day. Electronic warfare in space as military dependence. As satellites grew, both sides developed capabilities to jam or disable enemy space assets. Electronic warfare systems could blind reconnaissance satellites or disrupt communication links. The Soviets developed ground-based lasers capable of damaging or destroying satellite sensors. The Americans responded with hardened satellites and redundant systems to maintain capabilities even under attack. Nuclear weapons in space. Both superpowers experimented with nuclear weapons in space. The American Starfish Prime test in 1962 detonated a nuclear bomb 400 kilometers above the Pacific Ocean, creating an electromagnetic pulse that damaged satellites and disrupted radio communications across the Pacific. The Soviets conducted their own high-altitude nuclear tests, exploring the effects of nuclear explosions in space. These experiments demonstrated the vulnerability of electronic systems to electromagnetic pulse and influenced the design of military satellites. The Outer Space Treaty of 1967 prohibited placing nuclear weapons in space, but both sides continued to develop dual-use technologies that could serve military purposes while maintaining the fiction of peaceful space exploration. Lunar militarization plans. Secret studies examined the military potential of lunar bases. The moon's low gravity and lack of atmosphere made it an ideal platform for launching missiles or other weapons toward Earth. Project Horizon. A 1959 Army study proposed establishing a lunar base by 1967. The base would serve as an observation post and potential weapons platform, giving the United States strategic control over Earth-Moon space. The Soviets had similar plans. Declassified. Documents reveal proposals for lunar bases that could serve as staging areas for missions to Mars or as platforms for observing and potentially attacking Earth-based targets. The militarization of near-Earth space. Today, space has become the ultimate high ground. Modern militaries depend on satellites for communication, navigation, reconnaissance, and targeting. Disabling an adversary's satellites could cripple their military effectiveness. Anti-satellite weapons have evolved from crude ramming devices to sophisticated systems that can disable satellites without creating dangerous orbital debris. Cyber attacks on satellite systems represent a new form of space warfare. The challenges of space militarization continue to evolve. As commercial space activities expand and new nations develop space capabilities, the potential for conflict in space grows. The lessons learned from Cold War space competition remain relevant as humanity ventures further into the cosmos. But the space race was only one front in the broader information war that both superpowers waged. During the Cold War, the battle for hearts and minds became as important as the competition for military supremacy. In the battle for hearts and minds, truth became the first casualty. Both superpowers weaponized information itself, creating elaborate propaganda machines designed to shape public opinion around the world. The Cold War was not just a competition between military forces or economic systems. It was a battle for the human psyche. Both the United States and Soviet Union understood that winning the support of populations, both at home and abroad, was crucial to ultimate victory. The birth of modern propaganda. The techniques of mass persuasion had been refined during World War II, when all combatants used radio, film, and print media to rally support and demoralize enemies. The Cold War saw these techniques sophisticated into a science. The CIA Psychological Strategy Board, established in 1951, coordinated American propaganda efforts worldwide. Their mission was to counter Soviet influence through what they called psychological warfare, the planned use of propaganda and other psychological actions to influence opinions and behavior. Radio Free Europe and Psychological Warfare. Radio Free Europe, ostensibly a private organization, was actually funded and controlled by the CIA, broadcasting from transmitters in West Germany. It beamed Western news and propaganda into Soviet-controlled Eastern Europe. The programming was sophisticated, mixing accurate news reporting with subtle anti-communist messaging. Native speakers, many of them exiles from communist countries, delivered broadcasts that sounded authentic and local while promoting Western values. The psychological impact was enormous. Behind the Iron Curtain, millions of people risked imprisonment to listen to these forbidden broadcasts. They provided an alternative narrative to official communist propaganda and helped maintain hope for eventual liberation. Soviet active measures. The KGB developed its own sophisticated propaganda apparatus called active measures, covert operations designed to influence foreign governments and public opinion. Service A, a special department within the First Chief Directorate, specialized in disinformation campaigns. Soviet active measures included forged documents, false flag operations, and the promotion of conspiracy theories designed to discredit the West. They spread stories about CIA involvement in assassinations, American development of biological weapons, and Western responsibility for various international crises. One of their most successful operations was promoting the conspiracy theory that the CIA created HIV/AIDS as a biological weapon. This story launched in a Soviet-sponsored newspaper in 1983, spread around the world, and is still believed by some people today. Cultural infiltration. The CIA secretly funded cultural organizations, magazines, and artistic endeavors as part of its propaganda efforts. The Congress for Cultural Freedom, which promoted Western intellectual values, was actually a CIA front organization. Abstract expressionist art was promoted as a symbol of American creative freedom, contrasting with Soviet socialist realism. Jackson Pollock and other American artists became unwitting weapons in the cultural Cold War. Their work displayed internationally as proof of Western artistic liberty. The Soviets countered with their own cultural programs, promoting Soviet arts, literature, and music as expressions of socialist achievement. World youth festivals and cultural exchanges served as vehicles for spreading Soviet influence. Operation Mockingbird and media manipulation. The CIA's Operation Mockingbird involved recruiting journalists and media executives to spread propaganda and gather intelligence. Hundreds of American journalists, including some at major news organizations, secretly cooperated with the agency. These journalists would plant stories, suppress others, and provide the CIA with intelligence gathered during their work. The operation gave the agency significant influence over what Americans read and watched, blurring the line between news and propaganda. When these operations were exposed in the 1970s, they caused a crisis of confidence in American media. The public began to question whether the news they were receiving was genuine reporting or government manipulation. Disinformation campaigns. Both sides became masters of disinformation, the deliberate spread of false information designed to deceive and manipulate. These campaigns often mixed truth with lies, making them more credible and harder to debunk. The Soviets spread stories about American plans to start nuclear war, CIA involvement in drug trafficking, and Western exploitation of developing nations. Many of these stories contained elements of truth, making them more believable. The Americans responded with their own disinformation about Soviet capabilities, intentions, and internal problems. Stories about Soviet economic failures, political repression, and military weaknesses were amplified and sometimes exaggerated for propaganda effect. The technology of persuasion. As technology advanced, so did propaganda techniques. Television became a powerful medium for reaching mass audiences, and both sides invested heavily in international broadcasting. The Voice of America became the flagship of American international broadcasting, reaching audiences worldwide with news and commentary that promoted American values. The BBC World Service served a similar function for British interests. The Soviets expanded Radio Moscow and established television services that broadcast internationally. Their programming emphasized socialist achievements and Western failures, particularly in areas like racial equality and economic justice. Psychological operations in developing nations. The real battleground for propaganda was the developing world, where newly independent nations were choosing between communist and capitalist models of development. Both superpowers launched intensive campaigns to win these nations' allegiance. American propaganda emphasized freedom, prosperity, and individual opportunity. The Peace Corps, while genuinely humanitarian, also served propaganda purposes by showing American goodwill and capabilities to developing populations. Soviet propaganda focused on anti-imperialism, economic equality, and solidarity with oppressed peoples. They portrayed the Soviet Union as the natural ally of formerly colonized nations, fighting Western imperialism. The space race as propaganda. The space race was as much about propaganda as scientific achievement. Both sides understood that spectacular space accomplishments could demonstrate technological superiority and inspire global admiration. Sputnik was a propaganda triumph for the Soviets, suggesting that their system could achieve what capitalist America could not. The first human spaceflight by Yuri Gagarin was another major propaganda victory. The American moon landing was perhaps the greatest propaganda achievement of the Cold War. The image of American astronauts planting the flag on the lunar surface communicated American technological superiority to audiences worldwide. Academic and intellectual warfare. Universities became battlegrounds in the propaganda war. Both sides established exchange programs, funded research, and recruited intellectuals to promote their ideologies. The CIA secretly funded academic conferences, scholarly journals, and research institutes. American universities received covert funding to promote studies that supported Western positions on international issues. The Soviets established friendship societies, cultural institutes, and academic exchange programs designed to spread socialist ideas among Western intellectuals. They were particularly successful in recruiting sympathizers among leftist academics and students. The counterculture and propaganda. The American counterculture movement of the 1960s presented both challenges and opportunities for propagandists. While anti-war protests embarrassed the American government, they also demonstrated the freedom of expression that distinguished democracies from communist states. Soviet propagandists tried to exploit American domestic unrest, highlighting racial tensions, anti-war protests, and social inequality. They portrayed these problems as inevitable consequences of capitalism and imperialism. American propagandists eventually learned to turn criticism into strength, arguing that the ability to protest and reform demonstrated the superiority of democratic systems over rigid communist states. The economics of propaganda. Both superpowers spent enormous sums on propaganda activities. The CIA's budget for propaganda operations was classified, but estimates suggest it reached hundreds of millions of dollars annually during the height of the Cold War. The Soviets devoted similar resources to their propaganda apparatus, maintaining international broadcasting services, cultural centers, and front organizations worldwide. The economic burden of these activities contributed to their eventual financial crisis. Long-term effects. The propaganda wars had lasting effects on global culture and politics. Many developing nations adopted political rhetoric and ideological frameworks that originated in Cold War propaganda campaigns. The techniques developed during this period, media manipulation, disinformation campaigns, cultural infiltration, became permanent features of international relations. Modern information warfare owes much to innovations developed during the Cold War, the digital age. Today's information warfare uses many of the same techniques pioneered during the Cold War, but with digital technology that allows for unprecedented reach and targeting. Social media platforms have become the new battleground for influence operations. The lessons of Cold War propaganda remain relevant as nations and non-state actors compete to shape global narratives. Understanding this history is crucial for recognizing and countering modern disinformation campaigns. While propaganda wars raged in the media, another even deadlier competition was taking place in secret laboratories and missile silos around the world. The nuclear arms race brought humanity closer to extinction than most people realize. Humanity has come closer to nuclear annihilation than most people realize. Declassified documents reveal moments when the world balanced on the edge of atomic catastrophe, saved only by the decisions of individual officers and the luck of functioning communication systems. The development of nuclear weapons created the most dangerous period in human history, with arsenals capable of destroying civilization. Multiple times over, both superpowers lived in constant fear of a first strike that would demand immediate retaliation. The early nuclear arms race. After the United States demonstrated nuclear weapons at Hiroshima and Nagasaki, the Soviet Union launched a crash program to develop their own atomic bomb. Led by Igor Kurchatov and aided by intelligence stolen from the Manhattan Project, they succeeded in 1949. The American nuclear monopoly had lasted only 4 years. When the Soviets tested their first hydrogen bomb in 1953, just months after the American test, it became clear that the nuclear arms race would be closely competitive. Both sides began developing delivery systems that could reach the enemy homeland. Long-range bombers gave way to intercontinental ballistic missiles that could strike anywhere on Earth within 30 minutes of launch. Broken arrow incidents. The term broken arrow referred to accidents involving nuclear weapons. Between 1950 and 1980, the Pentagon acknowledged 32 such incidents, though the actual number was likely higher. In 1961, a B-52 bomber carrying 2 hydrogen bombs broke apart over North Carolina. One bomb's safety mechanisms functioned correctly, but the other failed catastrophically. Only a single low-voltage switch prevented a nuclear explosion that would have devastated the East Coast. Another incident occurred in 1966 when a B-52 collided with a refueling tanker over Spain. 4 hydrogen bombs fell to Earth near the village of Palomares. 2 bombs' conventional explosives detonated, spreading radioactive material over farmland. A third was recovered intact, but the 4th fell into the Mediterranean and required an extensive underwater search. Soviet nuclear accidents. The Soviet Union had its own share of nuclear accidents, many kept secret for decades. The most serious occurred at the Mayak nuclear facility in 1957, when a storage tank containing radioactive waste exploded. The explosion released twice as much radiation as the Chernobyl disaster, contaminating thousands of square kilometers. Entire villages were evacuated and bulldozed, but the incident remained classified until the 1970s. Another serious accident happened in 1983 when Lieutenant Colonel Stanislav Petrov was monitoring Soviet early warning systems. The computers indicated that American missiles had been launched toward the Soviet Union. Petrov judged it to be a false alarm and did not report it to his superiors, likely preventing nuclear war. The Cuban Missile Crisis. The closest the world came to nuclear war was during the Cuban Missile Crisis of October 1962. Soviet medium-range missiles in Cuba could strike most of the United States within minutes, eliminating America's warning time. For 13 days, the superpowers faced off while the world held its breath. What the public did not know was how close military commanders came to launching nuclear weapons without authorization from their political leaders. On October 27th, Soviet submarine B-59 was detected by American destroyers while submerged near Cuba. The submarine's commander, believing war had begun, ordered the launch of a nuclear torpedo. The launch required agreement from 3 officers, and one, Deputy Brigade Commander Captain Vasily Arkhipov, refused to consent. Unknown heroes of nuclear restraint. Arkhipov's decision may have saved the world from nuclear war. If that torpedo had been fired, it would likely have triggered an immediate American nuclear response, escalating to full-scale global conflict. Similar incidents occurred throughout the Cold War. In 1995, a scientific rocket launch from Norway triggered Russian early warning systems. President Boris Yeltsin activated his nuclear briefcase and prepared to order retaliation before communications clarified that it was not an attack. Nuclear command and control. Both superpowers developed elaborate systems to ensure nuclear weapons could be used quickly in a crisis while preventing unauthorized launch. These systems created their own risks, as the pressure for rapid response left little time for careful deliberation. The American system relied on the National Command Authority, the President and Secretary of Defense, to authorize nuclear weapon use. But procedures existed for military commanders to launch weapons if communications with Washington were severed. The Soviet system was even more centralized, with launch authority concentrated in the Politburo. However, they also developed an automated system called Dead Hand that could launch a nuclear response even if Soviet leadership was killed in a first strike. Technological failures and false alarms. The complexity of nuclear command systems created numerous opportunities for malfunction. Computer glitches, radar anomalies, and communication failures repeatedly generated false warnings of nuclear attack. In 1979, a training scenario was accidentally loaded into NORAD's computers, showing a massive Soviet attack in progress. For several minutes, military commanders prepared for nuclear war before the error was discovered. Another incident occurred. In 1983, when Lieutenant Colonel Stanislav Petrov was monitoring Soviet early warning satellites. The system indicated that American ICBMs had been launched, but Petrov judged it to be a malfunction and did not report the warning. Nuclear war plans. Declassified documents reveal the scope of nuclear war planning during the Cold War. The Single Integrated Operational Plan, (SIOP), outlined how American nuclear forces would be used in a conflict. SIOP-62, the war plan in effect during the early 1960s, called for attacking over 3,000 targets in the Soviet Union, China, and Eastern Europe. The plan made no distinction between military and civilian targets, essentially calling for the destruction of communist civilization. Soviet plans were similarly comprehensive. Their nuclear doctrine called for massive retaliation against NATO countries in response to any nuclear attack, regardless of its scope or origin. The psychology of nuclear deterrence. Nuclear strategists developed theories about how to maintain peace through the threat of mutual destruction. The concept of mutually assured destruction, MAD, held that neither side would start a nuclear war if both faced certain annihilation. However, the stability required both sides to maintain credible threats while avoiding actions that might trigger an accidental war. The psychological pressure on decision-makers was enormous, as any mistake could lead to global catastrophe. Limited nuclear war concepts. Some strategists explored the possibility of limited nuclear war, conflicts where nuclear weapons would be used tactically without escalating to full-scale exchanges. NATO doctrine included plans to use nuclear weapons against Soviet conventional forces in Europe. These concepts proved problematic because they made nuclear war seem more thinkable and manageable. Critics argued that any nuclear use would inevitably escalate to full-scale conflict, making limited war scenarios dangerously naive. Arms control efforts. The terrifying reality of nuclear weapons prompted efforts to control and limit their spread. The Limited Test Ban Treaty of 1963 prohibited atmospheric nuclear testing, reducing radioactive fallout, but not slowing weapons development. The Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty of 1968 aimed to prevent the spread of nuclear weapons to additional countries while committing existing nuclear powers to eventual disarmament. The treaty succeeded in limiting proliferation, but did not stop the arms race between superpowers. The human element. Throughout the Cold War, individual decisions by military officers, political leaders, and technical personnel prevented nuclear catastrophe. These moments of restraint and good judgment may have saved human civilization. The stories of Stanislav Petrov, Vasily Arkhipov, and other unsung heroes demonstrate the importance of human judgment in technological systems. Their willingness to question procedures and trust their instincts prevented automated systems from triggering global disaster. Modern nuclear risks. Today, 9 nations possess nuclear weapons, and the risks of nuclear conflict continue to evolve. Cyber attacks on nuclear command systems, nuclear terrorism, and accidents involving aging weapons pose new challenges. The lessons learned from Cold War near misses remain relevant as humanity grapples with the continued existence of nuclear weapons. Understanding how close we came to nuclear war may help prevent future catastrophes. While the world focused on the nuclear standoff between superpowers, another form of warfare was being waged in the shadows. Economic competition that used money itself as a weapon. While armies never directly clashed, the superpowers fought an economic war that shaped global finance and trade. Secret programs used money itself as a weapon, targeting enemy currencies, institutions, and entire economic systems. Economic warfare became a crucial battleground in the Cold War. Both sides understood that economic collapse could be as decisive as military defeat, leading to sophisticated campaigns targeting each other's financial systems. The Bretton Woods system as a weapon. The international monetary system established at Bretton Woods in 1944 gave the United States enormous economic advantages. With the dollar serving as the world's reserve currency, America could essentially print money to finance its global operations. This exorbitant privilege allowed the United States to run trade deficits while other countries had to accumulate dollars to participate in international trade. The system effectively subsidized American military and economic expansion worldwide. The Soviets recognized this advantage and worked to create alternative economic systems. They established the Council for Mutual Economic Assistance, Comecon, to coordinate trade among communist countries without using dollars. Targeted financial operations. The CIA developed sophisticated methods for economic warfare. They could manipulate commodity prices, disrupt international trade, and undermine foreign currencies through coordinated market operations. Operation Bernhard during World War II had shown the potential of counterfeiting enemy currency. During the Cold War, both sides explored ways to flood enemy territories with false money to trigger inflation and economic chaos. The CIA also used front companies and shell corporations to move money covertly, funding operations and allies while hiding American involvement. These financial networks became so complex that even intelligence agencies sometimes lost track of their own operations. The Soviet parallel economy. Behind the facade of central planning, the Soviet Union developed an extensive black market economy. Western intelligence agencies worked to exploit and expand this parallel system, undermining official Soviet economic structures. The CIA introduced Western consumer goods into Soviet markets, creating demand that the official economy could not satisfy. This strategy highlighted the failures of communist production while creating networks of contacts within Soviet society. Hard currency became a crucial weapon in this economic war. The Soviets desperately needed Western currency to buy technology and consumer goods, making them vulnerable to financial pressure and manipulation. Technology transfer controls. The Coordinating Committee for Multilateral Export Controls, COCOM, was established to prevent the transfer of strategic technology to communist countries. This system of export controls became a major tool of economic warfare. The controls were designed to keep the Soviets technologically backward, particularly in areas crucial to military capabilities. Computers, advanced materials, and precision machinery were strictly controlled. However, the Soviets developed elaborate networks to circumvent these controls. They used front companies, third-country intermediaries, and industrial espionage to acquire restricted technology. The KGB's Directorate T specialized in stealing Western technology and scientific secrets. Energy as an economic weapon. Control of energy resources became a crucial aspect of economic warfare. The United States worked to limit Soviet access to Western energy technology while encouraging alternatives to Soviet energy exports. When the Soviets built natural gas pipelines to Western Europe, the Reagan administration imposed sanctions on companies participating in the project. The goal was to prevent Europe from becoming dependent on Soviet energy which could be used for political leverage. The Soviets, in turn, used their energy exports to gain influence in Western Europe and developing countries. Subsidized oil and gas created political relationships that complicated Western efforts to isolate the Soviet Union. Financial intelligence networks. Both sides developed extensive capabilities for financial intelligence gathering. They monitored international money flows, tracked economic indicators, and penetrated foreign financial institutions. The National Security Agency developed systems to monitor international financial communications, giving American policymakers unprecedented insight into global economic activities. This intelligence was used both for national security purposes and to gain advantages in trade negotiations. The Soviets had their own financial intelligence capabilities, though their closed economy limited their ability to participate in global financial markets. They focused on gathering intelligence about Western economic plans and vulnerabilities. Economic sanctions as warfare. Economic sanctions became a preferred tool for applying pressure without military force. The United States developed increasingly sophisticated sanctions regimes targeting specific individuals, companies, and economic sectors. These sanctions were often coordinated with allies to maximize their impact. The goal was to impose costs on adversaries while minimizing damage to friendly countries and the global economy. The Soviets had fewer opportunities to use economic sanctions due to their limited integration with the global economy. However, they could cut off trade and aid to pressure countries within their sphere of influence. Currency wars. Both sides engaged in currency manipulation to gain economic advantages. The Soviets kept their ruble artificially overvalued for prestige reasons, creating distortions that undermined their economy. The United States occasionally manipulated the dollar's value to support exports or pressure adversaries. However, the dollar's role as the global reserve currency limited America's freedom to manipulate its value too dramatically. Other countries became collateral damage in these currency wars. Developing nations found their economic plans disrupted by superpower competition over exchange rates and monetary policies. Commodities as weapons. Control of commodity markets became another battlefield in the economic war. Both sides tried to manipulate prices of strategic materials to benefit themselves and harm their adversaries. The Soviets could influence oil prices through their production and their relationships with oil-producing allies. They used this capability to pressure Western economies during periods of tension. The United States had greater influence over agricultural markets and could use food exports as a diplomatic tool. Grain embargoes were imposed on the Soviet Union during periods of particular tension, though these often hurt American farmers as much as Soviet consumers. Industrial espionage. Economic warfare included extensive industrial espionage. The KGB's Scientific and Technical Intelligence Directorate systematically stole Western technology, saving the Soviet Union billions in research and development costs. The CIA conducted its own industrial espionage, though on a smaller scale. They focused more on gathering intelligence about Soviet economic capabilities and plans rather than stealing technology. This industrial espionage blurred the lines between national security and commercial interests. Companies became unwitting participants in intelligence operations, while governments had to balance security concerns with economic competitiveness. The underground economy. Both sides developed extensive underground economies to support their covert operations. These networks moved money, goods and people across borders while evading official oversight. The CIA used drug trafficking networks, arms dealers, and other criminal organizations to support its operations. While officially opposed to these activities, the agency found them useful for achieving national security objectives. The Soviets had their own underground networks, often built around ethnic communities and ideological allies. These networks provided cover for intelligence operations while generating revenue for covert activities. Economic warfare consequences. The economic aspects of the Cold War had profound long-term consequences. The military-industrial complex that developed to support the arms race became a permanent feature of both economies. Developing countries were often devastated by superpower economic competition. Their economies were distorted by aid programs, trade manipulations, and pressure to choose sides in the global conflict. The focus on military spending and competition diverted resources from productive investments, slowing economic growth in both superpowers. This burden may have contributed to the eventual collapse of the Soviet system. Modern economic warfare. Today's economic conflicts use many techniques developed during the Cold War. Sanctions, financial intelligence, and currency manipulation remain important tools of statecraft. However, the global economy has become much more integrated, making economic warfare both more powerful and more dangerous. Financial contagion can spread rapidly across borders, making targeted economic attacks risky for attackers as well as targets. Understanding the history of Cold War economic warfare provides valuable insights for managing modern economic conflicts while minimizing damage to the global economy. But behind all these grand strategies and global competitions lay a human cost that was often overlooked. The secret operations of the Cold War touched millions of individual lives in ways that are only now becoming clear. Behind every declassified document lies a human story. The Cold War's secret operations touched millions of lives, from the intelligence officers who carried out dangerous missions to the innocent civilians who became unwitting victims of covert programs. The human dimension of intelligence work is often overshadowed by discussions of technology, strategy, and geopolitics. But the real cost of the Cold War was measured in human lives, those who served their countries in secret, those who suffered for their beliefs, and those who simply found themselves in the wrong place at the wrong time. The life of a spy. Intelligence officers lived lives of constant deception, maintaining false identities even with their own families. The psychological toll was enormous, as they navigated between their real selves and the personas required for their work. Many intelligence officers struggled with alcoholism, depression, and family breakdown. The stress of living a double life, combined with the knowledge that discovery could mean death, created mental health challenges that agencies were slow to address. Marriage and family life were particularly difficult for intelligence officers. Spouses often did not know their partner's real job, while children grew up with absent parents whose work could never be discussed or explained. Agents and assets. The human sources recruited by intelligence agencies, agents, informants, and assets faced even greater risks. These individuals betrayed their own countries, organizations, or communities, often for reasons of ideology, money, or coercion. When spy networks were uncovered, the human cost was severe. In the Soviet Union, exposure as a Western agent often meant execution or lengthy imprisonment in the Gulag. Families of exposed agents faced persecution, exile, or worse. The psychological profile of successful agents often included personality traits that made their betrayal particularly damaging. They were typically trusted individuals with access to sensitive information, exactly the people whose betrayal caused the most harm to their organizations and colleagues. Innocent victims. Perhaps the greatest tragedy of intelligence operations was the harm inflicted on innocent people. Mind control experiments used unwitting subjects who suffered permanent psychological damage. Covert operations destabilized entire countries, leading to civil wars that killed hundreds of thousands. The families of intelligence officers also paid a price. Many grew up not knowing what their parents did for a living, dealing with unexplained absences and sudden relocations. Some discovered their family's secret life only when operations went wrong or were later exposed. Communities that became testing grounds for psychological operations or weapons testing suffered long-term consequences. Entire populations were sometimes exposed to dangerous substances or manipulated through propaganda campaigns without their knowledge or consent. Defectors and their ordeals. Those who changed sides faced particular challenges. Defectors had to abandon everything: family, friends, career, country, often with little guarantee of what awaited them on the other side. The process of defection was extraordinarily dangerous. Detection could mean immediate execution, while successful defection often meant never seeing family members again. Intelligence agencies sometimes encouraged defections without fully considering the human cost to the individuals involved. Life after defection was often difficult. Former Soviet officials who defected to the West sometimes found themselves isolated and unemployable, their previous experience irrelevant to their new societies. Some became alcoholics or suffered mental breakdowns as they struggled to adapt. The families left behind. When intelligence officers were captured or defected, their families often faced retaliation. Children might be expelled from schools, spouses fired from jobs, and extended families subjected to surveillance and harassment. In some cases, families were used as leverage against captured or defected intelligence officers. The threat of harm to loved ones was often more effective than physical torture in breaking an agent's resistance. The stories of these families highlight the collateral damage of intelligence work. Innocent people suffered for decisions made by relatives, often decisions they knew nothing about until it was too late. Psychological casualties. The intelligence services gradually recognized that their personnel were suffering from what would now be called post-traumatic stress disorder. Operations that required torture, killing, or witnessing extreme violence left lasting psychological scars. Some officers became unable to distinguish between their cover identities and their real selves. Others developed severe paranoia, unable to trust anyone or maintain normal relationships. The suicide rate among intelligence personnel was higher than in the general population. Intelligence agencies were slow to provide mental health support, partly because the secrecy requirements made it difficult to find therapists who could be trusted with classified information. Many officers suffered in silence rather than seek help that might compromise their careers. Moral injury. Beyond the psychological trauma was the moral injury suffered by those who participated in activities they knew to be wrong. Intelligence. Officers were often required to commit acts that violated their personal moral codes in service of larger strategic objectives. Some found ways to rationalize their actions, convincing themselves that the ends justified the means. Others developed severe guilt and depression as they struggled with the moral compromises their work required. The concept of moral injury, damage to one's fundamental moral beliefs about right and wrong, was not well understood during the Cold War. Many intelligence officers carried this burden throughout their lives without adequate support or understanding. The price of secrecy. The requirement for secrecy meant that many of these human costs remained hidden for decades. Families never learned why their loved ones died or disappeared. Communities never understood why they were subjected to certain government programs. This secrecy prevented proper mourning and healing. It also made it difficult to learn from past mistakes and prevent similar abuses in the future. The delayed release of information through declassification has provided some closure, but often too late for the primary victims. Children of the Cold War. An entire generation grew up as children of intelligence officers, never fully understanding their parents' work but sensing the secrecy and tension that surrounded their family life. These children often struggled with trust and identity issues throughout their lives. Some followed their parents into intelligence work, while others deliberately chose completely different paths. Many did not learn the truth about their families' involvement in intelligence work until decades later, when documents were declassified or parents finally felt free to speak. Rehabilitation and acknowledgement. Some countries have made efforts to acknowledge and compensate the victims of intelligence operations. Truth and Reconciliation Commissions have documented abuses and provided forums for victims to tell their stories. However, many victims have never received acknowledgement or compensation for their suffering. The classified nature of many operations means that some abuses may never be fully documented or acknowledged. Lessons for the future. The human cost of Cold War intelligence operations provides important lessons for modern intelligence work. The need for oversight, accountability, and respect for human rights is clear from the historical record. Modern intelligence agencies have implemented better training, psychological support, and ethical guidelines. However, the fundamental tensions between operational requirements and human welfare remain. Honoring the sacrifice. Many intelligence officers and their families make genuine sacrifices in service of their countries. While some operations were misguided or abusive, others helped prevent nuclear war or protected democratic institutions. The challenge is to honor legitimate service while acknowledging the real harm caused by intelligence operations. This requires honest examination of the historical record and commitment to learning from past mistakes. Understanding the human cost of intelligence work is essential for maintaining democratic oversight of these activities. The people behind the operations, both those who conducted them and those who suffered from them, deserve to have their stories told and their sacrifices acknowledged. During the Cold War, both superpowers developed weapons and technologies so advanced they seemed like science fiction. Many of these programs remained classified for decades, hiding revolutionary breakthroughs that changed the nature of warfare. The race for technological superiority drove both sides to invest enormous resources in research and development. Projects that seemed impossible were given unlimited budgets and the brightest minds of their generation. The results were weapon systems that fundamentally altered the balance of power. Stealth technology and invisible aircraft. The development of stealth technology began in the 1960s as both sides sought ways to penetrate enemy air defenses. The concept was simple: make aircraft invisible to radar, but the execution required revolutionary advances in materials science and aerodynamics. The American stealth program produced aircraft like the F-117 Nighthawk and B-2 Spirit. These planes used angular designs and radar-absorbing materials to minimize their signature on enemy radar screens. During the Gulf War, the world saw stealth technology in action as F-117s struck targets in Baghdad with impunity. Soviet stealth research followed different paths. They focused on plasma stealth technology, using electromagnetic fields to bend radar waves around aircraft. While never fully deployed, their research influenced later Russian aircraft designs, including the T-50 fighter. The science behind stealth involved complex physics and exotic materials. Radar-absorbing coatings contained microscopic metal particles arranged in specific patterns. Airframe shapes were designed using computer models that calculated radar reflection from every angle. Directed energy weapons. Both superpowers invested heavily in directed energy weapons, lasers, particle beams, and other exotic systems that could destroy targets at the speed of light. These weapons promised to revolutionize warfare by making traditional armor and defenses obsolete. The American Strategic Defense Initiative included plans for space-based laser platforms that could shoot down incoming missiles. The technical challenges were enormous, requiring advances in power generation, beam focusing, and target tracking. Soviet laser research was equally ambitious. They developed ground-based laser systems capable of damaging satellites and tested airborne laser platforms. The Palyus spacecraft, launched in 1987, was reportedly equipped with a laser weapon, though the mission failed. Chemical laser systems showed the most promise. These devices used chemical reactions to generate coherent light beams powerful enough to destroy aircraft or missiles at considerable distances. The technology required careful handling of toxic chemicals and precise beam control systems. Electromagnetic pulse weapons. The discovery that nuclear explosions generated electromagnetic pulses led to research into EMP weapons that could disable electronic systems without causing physical destruction. These weapons promised to cripple enemy forces while leaving infrastructure intact. High-altitude nuclear tests revealed the devastating effects of EMP on unprotected electronics. The 1962 Starfish Prime test over the Pacific Ocean knocked out streetlights in Hawaii and damaged satellites in orbit. The implications for modern warfare were clear. Both sides developed EMP hardening techniques to protect their own systems, while researching ways to generate electromagnetic pulses without nuclear explosions. Conventional EMP weapons used explosive-driven generators to create powerful electromagnetic fields. The vulnerability of modern military systems to EMP became a major concern as electronics became more sophisticated. Computer-controlled weapons, guidance systems, and communication networks all needed protection from electromagnetic attack. Weather modification programs. Perhaps the most ambitious military research involved attempts to control the weather itself. Both superpowers investigated ways to use weather as a weapon, turning storms, droughts, and other natural phenomena into instruments of warfare. Project Stormfree attempted to weaken hurricanes by seeding them with silver iodide particles. The theory was that changing the storm structure could reduce wind speeds and alter the hurricane's path. While results were mixed, the research provided valuable insights into atmospheric physics. Military weather modification research included attempts to create fog, suppress precipitation, and even trigger earthquakes. Operation Popeye. During the Vietnam War used cloud seeding to extend the monsoon season and hamper enemy operations. The potential for weather warfare was so concerning that the Environmental Modification Convention was signed in 1977, prohibiting the military use of Environmental modification techniques. The treaty reflected fears that weather control could become a weapon of mass destruction. Biological enhancement programs. Military research into human enhancement explored ways to create super soldiers with improved physical and mental capabilities. These programs combined advances in medicine, psychology, and pharmacology to push the limits of human performance. Stimulant drugs were tested to keep soldiers alert during extended operations. Sleep deprivation countermeasures included everything from caffeine derivatives to exotic compounds that could maintain cognitive function without rest. Soviet research into human enhancement was reportedly more extensive. They investigated genetic modification, surgical enhancement, and pharmaceutical interventions to create superior military personnel. The full extent of these programs remains classified. Modern enhancement research continues with developments in exoskeletons, brain-computer interfaces, and genetic therapy. The ethical implications of creating enhanced soldiers raise questions about the future of warfare and human nature itself. Underwater warfare technology. The oceans became a crucial battleground during the Cold War, leading to revolutionary advances in submarine technology, sonar systems, and underwater weapons. Both sides developed submarines that could operate at extreme depths and remain submerged for months. Nuclear submarines represented the ultimate expression of underwater warfare capability. These vessels could cruise submerged indefinitely, limited only by crew endurance and food supplies. Their nuclear missiles provided a survivable second strike capability. Advanced sonar systems allowed submarines to detect targets at enormous distances while remaining hidden themselves. Passive sonar arrays could identify specific ships by their acoustic signatures, while active sonar could map the ocean floor in detail. Underwater weapons included supercavitating torpedoes that could travel at hundreds of miles per hour by creating air bubbles around their hulls. These weapons reduced underwater travel time from minutes to seconds, revolutionizing submarine warfare. Satellite technology and space weapons. The militarization of space led to sophisticated satellite systems that could observe, photograph, and communicate across global distances. These orbital platforms became crucial for intelligence gathering, navigation, and military coordination. Reconnaissance satellites evolved from simple film return systems to real-time digital imaging platforms capable of reading newspaper headlines from orbit. The resolution and coverage of these systems gave military planners unprecedented situational awareness. Communication satellites enabled global military command and control. Networks of satellites provided redundant communication links that could survive nuclear attack, ensuring that military leaders could coordinate forces even during global conflict. Anti-satellite weapons were developed to counter enemy space assets. These included ground-based missiles, orbital interceptors, and even suicide satellites that could ram enemy spacecraft. The vulnerability of satellites led to extensive research into defensive measures. Computer warfare and early cyber operations. The emergence of computer technology created new possibilities for warfare. Long before the internet, intelligence agencies were exploring ways to use computers as weapons. Electronic warfare evolved from simple jamming to sophisticated attacks on enemy computer systems. Early computer viruses were developed as potential weapons against enemy information systems. The concept of logic bombs, programs that would activate during wartime and destroy enemy computer networks, was extensively researched. Code breaking and cryptography became increasingly important as military communications moved to digital formats. The development of public key cryptography and advanced encryption algorithms reflected the importance of protecting information. In electronic warfare, network infiltration techniques were developed to penetrate enemy computer systems and steal information or plant malicious code. These early cyber operations laid the groundwork for modern information warfare. Mind control and psychological weapons. Beyond MKUltra, intelligence agencies researched other forms of psychological warfare, including subliminal messaging, electromagnetic mind control, and chemical agents that could alter behavior. These programs explored the boundaries between science and science fiction. Infrasound weapons used low-frequency sound waves to cause disorientation, nausea, and fear in enemy personnel. The psychological effects of an audible sound were studied as potential crowd control and battlefield applications. Electromagnetic effects on the brain were investigated as possible mind control mechanisms. Some researchers claimed that specific radio frequencies could induce hallucinations, alter mood, or even control behavior, though results were largely inconclusive. Chemical agents beyond traditional drugs were researched for psychological warfare applications. These included compounds that could cause temporary memory loss, induce specific phobias, or create false memories in enemy personnel. Advanced materials and metamaterials. Military research drove the development of exotic materials with properties that seemed to defy physics. Metamaterials could bend light in impossible ways, while smart materials could change their properties. On command, carbon fiber composites provided strength-to-weight ratios that enabled new aircraft designs. These materials were lighter than aluminum, but stronger than steel, revolutionizing aerospace engineering. Shape memory alloys could return to predetermined shapes when heated, enabling self-repairing structures and adaptive weapon systems. Military applications included everything from aircraft wings that could change shape to armor that could adapt to different threats. Superconducting materials enabled magnetic levitation systems, electromagnetic launchers, and ultra-sensitive detection equipment. The military potential of room temperature superconductors drove extensive research into exotic materials and manufacturing techniques. Artificial intelligence and autonomous weapons. Early artificial intelligence research was heavily funded by military agencies seeking automated decision-making systems, autonomous vehicles, and intelligent weapons. The goal was to create machines that could operate independently in dangerous environments. Expert systems were developed to assist military commanders in complex decision-making situations. These early AI programs could analyze vast amounts of information and recommend courses of action based on military doctrine and tactical principles. Autonomous vehicles, including early drone aircraft and robotic ground vehicles, were tested for reconnaissance and combat missions. The challenge was creating machines that could operate reliably in unpredictable combat environments. Machine learning algorithms were applied to pattern recognition, target identification, and threat assessment. Military researchers recognized that artificial intelligence could process information faster and more accurately than human operators in many situations. The legacy of secret weapons research. Many technologies developed for military purposes eventually found civilian applications. The internet, GPS, satellite communication, and countless other innovations emerged from military research programs that were once highly classified. The investment in advanced technology during the Cold War created entire industries and transformed global society. The competition between superpowers drove innovation at an unprecedented pace, producing breakthroughs that might have taken decades to achieve otherwise. However, the focus on weapons development also created ethical dilemmas that persist today. The same technologies that protect societies can also be used to oppress them. The challenge is harnessing the benefits of military research while avoiding its dangers. Understanding the history of secret weapons programs provides insights into current technological developments. Many of today's emerging technologies, from artificial intelligence to quantum computing, have dual-use potential that requires careful consideration. The declassified history of Cold War weapons research reveals the enormous resources that nations will invest in maintaining military superiority. The technologies developed during this period continue to shape modern warfare and will influence future conflicts in ways we are only beginning to understand. While the public watched rockets launch toward the moon, a parallel battle was raging in the darkness of space. Military satellites, orbital weapons platforms, and secret missions that remain classified to this day. The militarization of space began almost immediately after Sputnik proved that orbital flight was possible. Both superpowers understood that whoever controlled the high ground of space would have decisive advantages in any future conflict. The Corona program and early spy satellites. The Corona satellite program, running from 1959 to 1972, fundamentally changed intelligence gathering. These satellites could photograph Soviet territory from orbit, providing images that no U-2 spy plane could safely obtain after Gary Powers was shot down. The first successful Corona mission, Discoverer 14, photographed more Soviet territory in a single day than all previous U-2 flights combined. The images revealed that American estimates of Soviet missile strength had been dramatically wrong. There was no missile gap favoring the Soviets. Each Corona satellite carried 9,000 feet of film in a recoverable capsule. After completing their mission, these capsules would separate from the satellite and parachute back to Earth, where they were snatched from the air by specially equipped aircraft flying over the Pacific Ocean. The technology was so secret that even the film recovery crews did not know what they were retrieving. The capsules were simply labeled as carrying scientific experiments, and the crews were told never to examine their contents. The Soviet response, Cosmos and Zenit. The Soviet Union developed its own reconnaissance satellite program under the cover name Cosmos. These satellites were actually part of the military's Zenit program, designed to photograph American military installations and track the movement of NATO forces. Unlike the American system, Soviet satellites used digital transmission to send images back to Earth. This gave them the advantage of near real-time intelligence, though the image quality was initially lower than film-based systems. The Soviets also developed satellites designed specifically to intercept and destroy other spacecraft. These hunter-killer satellites could maneuver in orbit and destroy enemy satellites either by ramming them or by detonating explosive charges nearby. Military space stations, Almaz and Mol. The Soviet Almaz program created a series of military space stations disguised as civilian research facilities. These stations were equipped with high-resolution cameras capable of reading license plates from orbit, along with electronic intelligence gathering equipment. Some Almaz stations were reportedly armed with defensive weapons, rapid-fire cannons, designed to destroy approaching enemy spacecraft. While this has never been officially confirmed, Test firings of such weapons allegedly took place in the early 1970s. The American Manned Orbiting Laboratory MALE program was designed to put military astronauts in space for similar missions. Though canceled in 1969 due to budget constraints and the superior capabilities of unmanned satellites, the program developed technologies later used in the space shuttle. Fractional Orbital Bombardment System, perhaps the most frightening space weapon, was the Soviet FOBS, Fractional Orbital Bombardment System. This allowed nuclear warheads to be placed in low Earth orbit and then deorbited to strike targets anywhere on Earth. FOBS missiles would launch into space, travel partway around the Earth, and then descend on their targets. The system could attack the United States from the south, avoiding early warning radars that faced north toward the Arctic. The psychological impact of FOBS was enormous. The knowledge that nuclear weapons could be orbiting overhead at any moment added a new dimension to Cold War paranoia. Though the system was eventually abandoned, it demonstrated the military potential of space-based weapons. Military communication satellites. Reliable global communication became crucial for coordinating military operations across continents. Both superpowers developed satellite communication networks that could survive nuclear attack and maintain command and control during warfare. The American Defense Satellite Communication System provided secure voice and data links between military commanders worldwide. These satellites used sophisticated encryption and frequency hopping to prevent enemy interception or jamming. Soviet military communication satellites served similar functions, while also providing backup systems for nuclear command and control. The ability to maintain communication with submarine-based nuclear forces was considered essential for deterrent credibility. Anti-satellite weapons. As both sides became dependent on satellites for intelligence, communication, and navigation, they also developed weapons to destroy enemy space assets. The first anti-satellite weapons were launched from aircraft or ground-based missiles. The Soviet Co-Orbital Interceptor program deployed satellites that could maneuver close to enemy spacecraft and destroy them with explosive charges. These weapons were tested against Soviet satellites to demonstrate their capabilities to American intelligence. American anti-satellite weapons included the ASM-135 missile launched from F-15 fighters. This weapon could reach satellites in low Earth orbit and destroy them through kinetic impact. The program was eventually canceled due to concerns about space debris. Space-based missile defense. President Reagan's Strategic Defense Initiative proposed using space-based weapons to defend against nuclear attack. The program envisioned networks of satellites equipped with lasers, particle beams, and kinetic interceptors. The technical challenges were enormous. Power generation, beam focusing, target tracking, and battle management all required revolutionary advances in technology. The cost estimates reached hundreds of billions of dollars. Soviet responses to SD-I included their own space-based defense systems and countermeasures designed to overwhelm or blind American defensive satellites. The competition drove both sides to invest heavily in exotic space technologies. Secret shuttle missions. The Space Shuttle program, while primarily civilian, included numerous classified military missions. These flights deployed secret satellites, conducted experiments, and performed other activities that remain classified. Department of Defense shuttle missions used the cargo bay to deploy large military satellites that could not be launched on conventional rockets. The shuttle's ability to retrieve and service satellites also provided unique military capabilities. Some classified shuttle experiments reportedly tested space-based weapons components, anti-satellite systems, and other military technologies. The full extent of these activities may never be publicly revealed. Electronic warfare in space. As military forces became dependent on satellite communications, navigation, and reconnaissance, electronic warfare in space became increasingly important. Both sides developed capabilities to jam, interfere with, or disable enemy space systems. Soviet electronic warfare satellites could blind American reconnaissance satellites or disrupt communication links. The ability to deny enemy access to space-based assets became a crucial military capability. American electronic warfare systems included both defensive measures to protect satellites and offensive capabilities to attack enemy space assets. The development of stealthy satellites and anti-jamming technologies became major priorities. Nuclear weapons in space. Both superpowers experimented with nuclear weapons in space, though the 1967 Outer Space Treaty prohibited their deployment. The high-altitude nuclear tests of the early 1960s demonstrated the devastating effects of electromagnetic pulse on satellites. Space-based nuclear weapons offered unique advantages, including global reach, surprise attack capability, and the ability to destroy large numbers of enemy satellites simultaneously. The temptation to deploy such weapons was balanced by treaty obligations and technical challenges. The concept of nuclear-powered satellites and spacecraft also raised proliferation concerns. These systems could potentially be converted into weapons, or their nuclear materials could be recovered and used for other purposes. Intelligence gathering from space. Military satellites revolutionized intelligence gathering by providing continuous surveillance of enemy territory. Real-time imagery allowed military planners to track troop movements, monitor weapons tests, and assess enemy capabilities. Electronic intelligence satellites intercepted enemy communications, radar signals, and other electronic emissions. These satellites could monitor military exercises, detect new weapons systems, and provide early warning of attack preparations. Ocean surveillance satellites tracked submarine movements, monitored naval exercises, and provided intelligence on enemy fleet deployments. The ability to monitor global ocean areas from space gave naval commanders unprecedented situational awareness. Space logistics and support. Supporting military operations in space required complex logistics networks. Ground stations tracked satellites and received intelligence data, while mission control centers coordinated space-based assets with terrestrial military forces. Launch facilities became high-priority targets in any conflict. The ability to rapidly replace damaged or destroyed satellites was considered crucial for maintaining military capabilities during extended conflicts. Space-based manufacturing and assembly was investigated as a way to build large military systems in orbit. These concepts included solar power satellites, weapons platforms, and space-based factories for producing military equipment. International competition and cooperation. The militarization of space created tensions between nations while also driving international cooperation. Agreements on space rescue, satellite notification, and orbital debris reflected shared interests in keeping space accessible. Technology transfer controls limited the spread of military space capabilities, while international monitoring systems tracked satellite launches and space activities. The challenge was balancing military security with scientific cooperation. Commercial space activities complicated military space operations as civilian satellites shared orbital space with military systems. The dual-use nature of many space technologies made it difficult to distinguish between civilian and military programs. Modern space warfare. Today, space has become a contested domain where nations compete for military advantage. Anti-satellite. Weapons, cyber attacks on satellites, and space-based surveillance systems are realities of modern warfare. The lessons learned from Cold War space competition remain relevant as new players enter the space arena. The technologies developed during this period continue to influence military space programs and international space policy. Understanding the history of secret space wars provides insights into current space militarization trends and the challenges of maintaining peace in the ultimate high ground above our planet. During the Cold War, both superpowers developed extensive programs for eliminating political enemies. These assassination operations targeted world leaders, dissidents, defectors, and anyone else deemed a threat to national security. The practice of political assassination has ancient roots, but the Cold War elevated it to an industrial scale. Intelligence agencies developed sophisticated methods for killing that could appear accidental, natural, or attributable to other causes. CIA assassination programs. The Central Intelligence Agency developed numerous plots to eliminate foreign leaders who opposed American interests. Fidel Castro of Cuba was the target of over 600 assassination attempts, using methods ranging from exploding cigars to poisoned diving suits. The CIA recruited mafia figures to help with Castro assassination attempts, believing that organized crime had the skills and connections needed for such operations. Mobsters Sam Giancana, Johnny Rosselli, and Santos Trafficante were all involved in various plots. Other CIA targets included Patrice Lumumba of the Congo, Rafael Trujillo of the Dominican Republic, and Salvador Allende of Chile. While not all of these operations succeeded, they demonstrated the agency's willingness to use lethal force against foreign leaders. The CIA's Technical Services Division developed exotic assassination weapons, including the heart attack gun that fired tiny darts containing shellfish toxin. These weapons were designed to leave no trace and make deaths appear natural. KGB assassination methods. The Soviet KGB perfected assassination techniques that became legendary for their creativity and ruthlessness. The agency developed numerous exotic poisons, radioactive substances, and other methods for eliminating enemies of the state. Georgy Markov, a Bulgarian dissident, was killed in London in 1978 by a pellet containing ricin poison fired from an umbrella. The assassination demonstrated the KGB's global reach and willingness to operate on foreign soil. Alexander Litvinenko, a former KGB officer who defected to Britain, was poisoned with radioactive polonium in 2006. The use of such an exotic and traceable poison suggested that the assassination was intended to send a message to other potential defectors. The KGB's Laboratory 12 developed numerous lethal substances for use in assassinations. These included binary poisons that were harmless individually but deadly when combined, and slow-acting toxins that would kill victims days or weeks after. Exposure. Wet work and active measures. The Soviet term wet work referred to assassination operations, while active measures encompassed broader efforts to influence foreign governments through covert means. These operations were coordinated at the highest levels of Soviet leadership. KGB assassination teams operated worldwide, targeting Soviet defectors, foreign intelligence officers, and political dissidents. The operations were carefully planned and executed, with extensive surveillance and escape routes prepared in advance. The scale of Soviet assassination operations was enormous, with hundreds of confirmed kills and thousands more suspected cases. The KGB maintained lists of priority targets and updated them based on changing political circumstances. Training for assassination operations was conducted at special facilities where operatives learned to use exotic weapons, practice surveillance techniques, and develop cover identities. The training was realistic and sometimes resulted in accidental deaths. Operation Chaos and domestic surveillance. The CIA was also involved in domestic operations that blurred the line between intelligence gathering and political repression. Operation Chaos monitored American anti-war activists, civil rights leaders, and other dissidents. The program involved extensive surveillance, mail opening, and infiltration of domestic political groups. While ostensibly focused on foreign influence, the operation clearly violated the CIA's charter prohibiting domestic activities. Some researchers believe that Operation Chaos was connected to the assassinations of Martin Luther King Jr. and Robert F. Kennedy, though no definitive proof has been established. The program demonstrated how intelligence agencies could turn their capabilities against their own citizens. The FBI also conducted assassination operations through its COINTELPRO program, which targeted domestic political groups. Black Panther. Leader Fred Hampton was killed in a raid that was later revealed to have been orchestrated by the FBI. International cooperation in assassination. Intelligence agencies sometimes cooperated in assassination operations, sharing intelligence, resources, and expertise. The Five Eyes alliance between the United States, Britain, Canada, Australia, and New Zealand included coordination of lethal operations. Israeli Mossad operations often benefited from CIA intelligence, while American operations sometimes used British or other allied assets. The international nature of these operations made them difficult to investigate or prosecute. Drug cartels and organized crime groups were sometimes used as proxies for assassination operations. These relationships provided plausible deniability while giving intelligence agencies access to experienced killers and smuggling networks. The Iran-Contra affair revealed how arms dealing and drug trafficking were connected to covert operations, including assassination programs. The complex web of relationships made it difficult to determine where intelligence operations ended and criminal activity began. Technology and assassination. Advances in technology created new possibilities for assassination. Chemical weapons, biological agents, and sophisticated delivery systems all found their way into intelligence arsenals. Microdots containing lethal poisons could be concealed in everyday objects. Aerosol delivery systems could disperse toxins without detection. Time-delayed mechanisms could activate weapons hours or days after they were placed. Electronic devices offered new assassination methods. Pagers and cell phones could be rigged with explosives, while computer viruses could disable life support systems or cause industrial accidents. Satellite technology enabled precise tracking of assassination targets, while sophisticated communications allowed real-time coordination of complex operations. The global reach of modern technology made it difficult for targets to hide. Psychological warfare and intimidation. Not all assassination operations were intended to kill their targets. Some were designed to intimidate, discourage, or demonstrate. Capability. The mere threat of assassination could be as effective as actual killing. Poisoning attempts that caused illness but not death sent clear messages to targets and their associates. The use of exotic poisons or delivery methods was often intended to demonstrate sophistication and reach. Failed assassination attempts sometimes generated more publicity and fear than successful ones. The knowledge that intelligence agencies were actively trying to kill political opponents had a chilling effect on dissent and opposition. Media manipulation was often used to amplify the psychological impact of assassination operations. Stories about exotic weapons, foreign plots, and mysterious deaths were leaked to create an atmosphere of fear and paranoia. Legal and ethical issues. The use of assassination as a tool of statecraft raised profound legal and ethical questions. International law prohibited the assassination of foreign leaders, but enforcement was difficult and inconsistent. Congressional investigations in the 1970s revealed the extent of American assassination programs and led to restrictions on such activities. Executive Order 11905, signed by President Ford, prohibited U.S. involvement in political assassinations. However, subsequent administrations interpreted these restrictions narrowly. The targeted killing program developed after 9/11 demonstrated that assassination remained an active tool of American foreign policy, despite legal prohibitions. The ethics of assassination continued to be debated, with arguments about necessity, proportionality, and accountability. Intelligence agencies argue that elimination of specific individuals can prevent greater violence, while critics contend that assassination undermines the rule of law.